Hi there, and welcome to your Week 8 reading in Ethics of Nature. So today we're going to be talking about a little bit more about emotions and how they play a role in producing moral behavior, or can play a role, ideally play a role. Um, and also, I guess, how they can play a role in producing immoral behavior. Because in today, specifically, we're going to talk about envy and jealousy and the feelings of anger or resentment that can be induced by a sense that things aren't fair. Okay, so the first thing to remember is the point that we keep hammering, and we're going to come back to again, which is that our emotions are in part a set of evolved behaviors, which means that they are adaptive. That is, they're designed in a certain sense to help us navigate a certain set of environmental conditions, which in this case is each other, right? So the point here again is that humans didn't just evolve opposable thumbs and our upright stance. We also evolved behaviors, personalities, feelings, mental cognitive capacities. And that side of our evolution has probably more to do with interactions between us and other humans than it does to do with between us and our environmental surroundings. So, keep in mind, humans basically had, in very simple terms, two sets of environments with which to evolve to be adaptive to. One, largely speaking, the upland plains of Africa, which is where most kinds of humans developed. The other, small groups, right? Our people, our tribe, and so our emotions are part of the second set of conditions that we adapted to, right? And so what were those conditions? What's it like being a member of a tribe? Well, one of the things that we know is that tribes necessarily are not so hierarchical as much as they're kind of more horizontal in terms of how the power dynamics unfold. Okay? So, that means that we are going to have a highly developed sense of envy or jealousy because it's one of the emotional mechanisms that helps us maintain an overall egalitarian power dynamic. That is, a power dynamic within a group in which no one person is too much more valued than any other. So you and I are on an internal level inside ourselves. We kind of feel ourselves to be more or less the same. I'm your teacher, you're my student. That necessarily carries a set of norms or behavioral standards that we're going to try to abide by. But deep down, we feel that we're not worth more than each other or less. Okay? And so one of the ways in which we regulate that, okay, and this is one of the ways in which we can see envy as a regulatory mechanism, right? A regulatory, a way to keep the dial sort of even. Because if I see you valuing yourself more than me, and that this plays out in our group in such a way that you hoard resources or start bossing people around or controlling or manipulating others or even dominating in terms of attention, right? Which is a very valuable resource when you're talking about human beings. I'm going to feel, like, why are you being so arrogant? You know? And B, if you do succeed in amassing more of those things that we all value, I'm going to feel jealous of you, right? So that's our starting point for today. That envy has evolved as a regulatory mechanism to help us maintain more or less equal power relations inside a small group. Now, as you know, we don't live strictly in tribes anymore. We've written about how we still belong to tribes, family groups, neighborhood groups, cultural groups, religious groups, and you guys have done a great job in terms of identifying and analyzing the way in which we're still tribal. However, you also all know that we are parts of these much bigger networks of other humans. And in this context, envy, our evolved regulatory mechanism to make us more or less equal, is, I hate to say this, but maladaptive. The problem with evolution is that it has to catch up to changing conditions. And when conditions change really rapidly, evolution isn't the best mechanism in terms of altering our behavior to fit better with our conditions. So, let me give you another example. Okay? Now, we talked about earlier this week how the human superpower isn't intellectual brilliance, although there are some of us who have that capacity, but as a species, lots of us are medium, let's say, myself included. So what is then the species level superpower that has allowed us to thrive as a species so extraordinarily well in so many different environments? Let me just stop here, and just as a side note, Homo sapiens kind of filtered out of Africa probably at different times, right? Homo Neanderthals were already kind of out there in Northern Europe, and they had, kind of achieved some sort of balance to some extent, although it's, that's debatable too. But the point is that there were small numbers of them, right? So humans trickled out, and then around 50,000 years ago, you start to see this explosion, right? It's often called the cognitive revolution, when human Stone Age technology took on a number of extraordinary leaps. And so you saw humans suddenly spread to all corners of the globe. And just think about how crazy that is, given what we had technologically speaking. So humans settled in Australia probably 30 or 40,000 years ago, which means that they were building boats capable of much larger ocean voyages than we still don't understand how they were able to do that, right? And then you had them cross over the land bridge from Siberia into Alaska and Canada, and then spread in just a few thousand years throughout the entire continent of North America and all the way down to the tip of South America. So this is unbelievable, and there's still a lot of mysteries. But what we do know is that they were able to do this because what we would think of as primitive technologies, but which were for the people at the time, these extraordinary revolutionary leaps. A needle and thread, for example, right? Before people draped and tied furs around themselves to keep warm. Look, let me tell you, you guys live in Montreal, as do I. It doesn't work that well, right? Sewing clothes so that your body heat starts to become used as a kind of tool to keep the whole body warm in very cold temperatures. And remember, we're talking about ice ages here in the late Pleistocene, right? So think about the coldest day in Montreal and then jack it up a little bit. So a needle and thread was an astonishing technological breakthrough that allowed people to settle in places that were covered with glaciers, northern Siberia, northern Canada. Yeah, and we talked about things like a kayak, right? Whoa, what an amazing technological feat for a Stone Age people. And then you have, one of the examples anthropologists like to use is the blowgun, right? These tiny little incredibly well-designed darts you can shoot 30, 40 meters tipped with poison that is immediately absorbed into the body of the animal, so it's not toxic to ingest the animal afterwards. Amazing. And this is in a climate where the wood was poorly suited for making bows, right? So in the North Country, where we have these wonderful yew trees, etc., we can make these fantastic recurved bows that we're capable of hunting deer and elk, caribou with. But in the Amazon, they don't have access to those materials. So what do? A deadly, incredibly accurate hunting weapon made from like a hollowed out stick that anyway, it's rifled. It's a miraculous piece of technological achievement. The point is mimicry. Human superpower is mimicry. That's the key to the success of Homo sapiens. The problem is this behavior, being able to mimic each other, and we've talked about body synchronization and these fantastic ways in which we can observe mimicry at work, can also be maladaptive. So when people do incredibly stupid things, which they sometimes do, again, myself included, we sometimes mimic them. And when, let's say, we're creating conditions in which we have some extraordinarily wealthy people who are able to acquire fantastic levels of resources that the rest of us can't even imagine. The envy that we feel is also kind of a maladaptive mechanism. Okay, so that's the beginning. Stay tuned for part 2.